There is nothing more important to documentaries than the interview. Whether it's the subject, which can shape the plot, or the setting, which can change the very nature of the material gained, one thing is for certain: interviews matter greatly when considering documentaries. To really examine how interviews affect a documentary, I thought it would be interesting to take two of the most critically acclaimed documentaries, both of which have influenced documentary greatly. I'm talking about the 1975 film Grey Gardens by Albert and David Maysles, and The Act of Killing, a 2012 documentary by Joshua Oppenheimer and co-directors. On the surface, the interviews in both of these films are quite similar. However, under a closer examination, the ways in which the interviews are taken highlight the tonal, thematic differences of these two famous documentaries. First, I'll look at setting, which is a big focus for Grey Gardens. The interview with Little Edie and Big Edie primarily take place in their close living area, especially their bedroom. This suits the purpose of the film well, to examine and observe the type of lifestyle these women now lead, as they talk about a lifestyle they once had. It's also a very personal space, which, despite the two characters being very performative in both their appearance and personality, captures the very close relationship they both have. It could almost be considered invasive, and arguments have been made that it didn't allow both Big and Little Edie to be presented in a manner that they preferred.
Now, what was the woman's name she gave you the letter? Mrs. Hitchcock.
I
She was
can't go
Ruby
back to
Chapman's
ancient history.
partner.
How can you remember so long? Now I'll have to get
They
drunk,
gave me
Edie.
the letter to
I'll
her
have
school.
to start drinking. I can't take it.
See,
Oh, she'll make a drunkard out of her mother.
what crackers do you want?
To contrast this, The Act of Killing uses setting to a very different extent. The film's primary social actor, Anwar Congo, is brought back to different locations where he killed many people during the Indonesian massacre of 1965 to 66 in order to film reenactments, which ultimately serves the film's purpose of exposing a man who is capable of such atrocities. One could argue that the two films use very different approaches in setting to achieve similar purposes, to force the interviewees to reflect and to expose their true selves. For the most part, The Act of Killing uses improvised interviewing techniques, where interviews are taken between takes, on the way to a shoot, or on the set itself. However, throughout, there are scenes where Anwar is recorded watching back what he's shot previously, and is asked to reflect, which is very much staged. This is an interesting technique of interview, and rather brash, as it forces the interviewee to reflect on what he had done, when perhaps at the time of the reenactment, the desired remorse wasn't captured. However, when the topic of the documentary itself is reflection, this method somewhat fits. On the other hand is Grey Gardens, in which the entirety of the film interview is improvised, as the approach is comparable to a day in the life style of documentary. This is also reflected in the rather small amount of footage or shooting time for a feature-length film of 40 days. The film captures Little Edie at times giving her philosophical points of view after having a conversation with Big Edie. These excellent one-liners are spread throughout the film and add a sense of spontaneity and improvisation.
So you just can't do anything about it. So I can see now why girls get married. You know, they're forced into it. It's all a question of who you want to stay with. Of course, I'm mad about animals, but raccoons and cats become a little bit boring.
I can't help but feel that, despite the interview's very limited voice appearance in Grey Gardens, that the interviewer is a much more participatory entity than that of the interviewer in The Act of Killing. This may seem as a contradictory statement, especially given that we hear more lines spoken to the social actors in The Act of Killing than in Grey Gardens, but there are a number of reasons why this is so. Despite there being very little words from the directors in Grey Gardens, often we see Little and Big Edie speak directly to the Maysles brothers, or else performing directly to the camera. There's also a shot in which the cameraman turns and faces a mirror, and we see the investigators actually in the house, solidifying their presence for the rest of the film. The camera is also somewhat shaky throughout the film, and interviews and all of these elements give it a more exposé tone. This once again contrasts the act of killing. Take the scene at the end, for instance. The intercutting shots of Anwar watching the TV are taken directly from his perspective, and even the close-ups of his face are from the perspective of the TV. This helps eliminate the presence of the director and draws attention to the man being alone with his thoughts. However, this is also a crucial scene in which the director confronts Anwar about the torture he committed, telling him that his actual victims suffered more pain, physically and emotional, than he did.
Jelas, apa yang dirasakan orang yang disiksa Bang Noir jauh lebih buruk dari ini karena Bang Noir tahu ini hanya film. Mereka tahu bahawa mereka akan dibunuh.
After this scene, we witness a physical manifestation of Anwar's anguish. There are no questions being asked, but he is neither addressing the camera or looking into it. The camera is there simply observing. Also, throughout the film, close-ups of various people's faces introduce an intimacy. However, rarely do these people acknowledge the camera or the cameraman. Intercutting scenes of Anwar silently lying in bed also reduce the overall presence of the director. For these reasons, I would argue that the act of killing has a more observational style when it comes to tone and the interviews. Interviews are a staple in documentary cinema and have the potential to sculpt the narrative as well as the themes and tones. In the act of killing, the interview methods resulted in the distancing of audience and Anwar, which was necessary so not as to glorify the participators of the massacre that took place. Whereas in Grey Gardens, the interview techniques resulted in a more personal account of life for these two women, and highlight the curious relationship between them both.